All right. Good morning, everyone. I apologize for that. As always, I planned to start. Well, I knew that I might start at a later time, slightly this morning, when I set the stream up last night, and I'm still in Western New York for another day or so. And my mother was gracious enough to make some breakfast this morning, so here we are. So let me make sure this is broadcasting to YouTube. And hey, thank you to those of you who liked this before I even started. There are 5 likes here at the start of the stream. And I don't know, in my current subscriber base, I don't know if any of you all know. Well, if the nameless protagonist saw that, he probably knows who Paul Ehrlich is. If BGS, if more saw the title, he knows who Paul Ehrlich is. But I wondered if the majority of my subs here would know who Paul Ehrlich is. But we're going to talk about that. Man of Tomorrow, thank you for being here. Mr. Blue Collar, thank you for being here. Man of Tomorrow, thank you for being here. Thank you for smashing that like button. Let me share this over on my original channel. This is going to be, well, I'm not intending for it to be morbid and macabre and scary, but people are talking about this now. The world's population, depopulation, what's happening here in the United States, in China, in Japan, in South Korea. A lot of countries are facing decreased populations, negative replacement rates. And while we're this will be a recurring theme in this stream, while we're debating over cheesecake, whether or not to eat at the Cheesecake Factory, and people are taking Instagram selfies, and while we're so engaged with our college football teams, I'm guilty of that. My team is in the Big Ten championship game tonight. Our world leaders are they're sitting and they're looking and they're thinking about the world, and they're thinking about our lives. The president, the United Nations. Anytime you hear the World Bank is meeting, the G7 is meeting. Whenever you hear about these world leaders, us on the ground level, we're looking around, and we're concerned with what we're concerned with here on the ground level. But our world leaders are always looking around and thinking numerous things. And one of the things that they think about is, are there too many humans on the planet? And people have been thinking about this for a while. This is not new. Mr. Blue Collar says, yes, yes, that's right. And so this is very much, excuse me, since when I started 2023, I went a little bit deeper into the climate thing. This is intermingled with climate and energy and resources, because there are people who are concerned that there are, in fact, too many humans on the planet. And what's the problem? What are the potential dangers of having too many humans on the planet? We're going to get into that. Man of Tomorrow says these conversations are needed, but not around gender war based conversation. Well, Man of Tomorrow, I'm going to get into that. And I wonder, as I was thinking about this stream, I wonder how much of that was meditated, and how much of that is feeding into this thing, not just in our country, but in other countries. Let me share this on my original channel in case other people want to. Yeah, and BGS has been talking about this. He just did some good work on it this week. So we know about the mouse utopia. We know about that theory. But I've been doing a lot of thinking about programming. The programming that we're seeing has the programming that we're seeing via Disney and via whoever is producing these TV shows on Netflix, and Hulu, these agendas promoting that men and women are the same and they're interchangeable and they can do the same things. And is any of this premeditated? And is that just another component in decreasing the population? I almost feel like I need to be careful talking about this because YouTube is watching and they don't necessarily like certain things being discussed, but this is a science channel and this is a science discussion. And a lot of people are not looking at this. Okay, that was shared over there. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to play my introduction. And then I'm going to jump in. Okay, JJ Marr says Hollywood has always been an integral part in social engineering. Right. So the question is, and this is gonna come up during the stream, if you start getting people thinking, if you get in this example, if you get one gender thinking they're better than the other and they don't need the other, and if they're fighting instead of working together, well, you're going to get less people. You're going to get less humans created. And what messages are being pushed through Disney and Hulu and Netflix and in Warner Brothers, they were going to replace Superman. They were going to replace all of their flagship characters, Superman and Batman and the others, with female counterparts. Marvel's been doing that. Well, that's one of the reasons why this matters, because that programming gets into the minds of people, particularly young people, and they carry that programming forward. That's why the indoctrination that takes place at institutions of higher learning, that's why that matters, because these people are going out into the world and they're taking those world views out there with them. Okay, Mr. Blue Collar says, I think you're finding more people are living more in your larger cities than when our grandparents, great-grandparents, etc., lived in smaller cities and towns. I think that's true as well. Okay, let me play the intro and then I will jump in because I don't want to be on for hours and hours.
So Anwar, I see you have the periodic tables on your chest.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that all about? Why are you walking around with a chemistry chart on your chest?
Well, Cheryl, so this channel is a STEM channel. So when I was conceiving of it and figuring out how to grow it, I figured I should have some T-shirts to go with it. So the periodic table is critical to most of the scientific fields. Welcome to Big Discussions 76, Science and Technology. Science and technology are all around us all of the time, and there are always science and technology stories to tell. There are always science and technology stories to tell. So last week I did some technology with the Amazon Digit Robot. Today we're going to do, I guess this would fall under science current events. It would fall under science history and also ecology. So this stream, this is something I've been thinking about for a while, as I described BGS Ibmore. For those who are watching this, I suspect there'll be some eyeballs on this who have never seen this channel before, have never heard of BGS Ibmore. For some people, that's a bad word. Not for me, but he's done a lot of work on this recently, talking about the negative replacement rate in the Western countries. I guess we could throw South Korea in there as well, but from the angle of gender and the genders, well, I would say the genders turning on each other, but the genders not the genders not working together for a number of reasons. But, among those, no longer wanting to adhere to the roles, no longer thinking of families first, but thinking of individuals first, the influences of technologies like social media. I do agree that social media has had a negative impact for the good that it can do. It's also done a lot of bad, and all you have to do is look at Instagram and TikTok and OnlyFans and see what's happening there. So a lot of things have changed, and there are now a lot of negative influences in society, such that coupling is not what it used to be, and coupling is not as easy. Well, I don't know that it was ever easy, but it's an altogether different ball game than it was years ago, before we had all this stuff and before all of the social movements took place and laid the seeds for men and women not getting along like they used to and working together like they used to. So where did this dream come from? So I've been thinking about this for a while. This time of year, and if you're looking at Twitter X, you will see some tweets in the next month of younger people talking about the older generations looking around and noticing that there are fewer younger people at Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner, and folks from the boomer generation and I guess the silent generation, however many of those that are left, you're going to see tweets and testimonies about them looking around and saying there are no more children in this family, there are no more younger people, there are no more babies, the bloodlines are crashing. All right. And you'll probably see a lot of that on TikTok. And you will see, if you haven't, you'll see a lot of testimonies about, you know what? I don't know that I've seen men tweeting about this and TikToking about this, but you see the women doing it. What's a fulfilling life? I will take those next life moves when I get ready, after I've traveled, after I've been fulfilled, and all kinds of things. You'll see those things. You see them throughout the year, but you're going to see a lot of that this time of year. So I'm a Gen Xer. I think those of you in the chat right now, you are Gen Xers as well. So I'm going to start with the generations. So we're Gen Xers. We were born, according to this chart, I think there's some variability here, 1965 to 1979. 1965 to 1979. So there are some folks who are in their late 50s who are Gen Xers. You wouldn't think it, but they are. So before us, those individuals who gave rise to us were the baby boomers, and also the silent generation. So those are the two generations that preceded us, the baby boomers and the silent generation. The baby boomers were born roughly 1946 to 1964. In the silent generation, they were born 1925 and from 1925 to 1945. So I guess my mother's oldest two siblings could arguably be silent generation individuals. I'll have to check with her to see when they were born. But I'm saying this to say that there's a portrait, there's a family picture that my mother and her siblings took with my late grandmother. They took one in 1972, and then they took one in 1982, so 10 years apart. And my grandmother, well, for my childhood, my grandmother had 8 children. Okay. So she had 8 children. She had 5 boys and 3 girls. Okay. So those are all Baby boomers. Does anyone know what the significance of the name baby boomers is? Anyone? Let's make this interactive. Does anyone know what the significance of that name baby boomer is? Hello, Queena. Thank you for stopping through. JJ Mars says, I remember reading how Japan's population experienced a decrease in growth years ago. Yes, Robert Kiyosaki. If any of you have read the Rich Dad Poor Dad books, Robert has talked about that because Robert is of Japanese descent. He talked about that in his books from a financial angle and how, and the economic stresses that the economic stresses that's going to impart upon Japan, the fact that they have fewer younger people to take care of the older people, and you have fewer younger people on the bottom paying into the system. So this is really complex. What's going on right now? Mr. Blue Collar says, here you go. Yeah, this was the time the most children were born. Right. So if any of you took history classes, these names don't come out of nowhere, and they usually have a significance. So the baby boomers, they were born kind of in that that post World War II, Korean War, in the civil rights era. They were born in that era, and the country became the environment. We're going to talk about environment. The environment was such that parents, fathers could find gainful employment, right? At that time, marriage was still a big deal. And you had fewer women going into the workforce and going and pursuing higher education. I'm not saying that it's wrong for them to do that, but the environment was such that it was fertile for larger families, for big families. And so your mothers typically worked part-time, but their main job at that time was to raise the children and take care of the children and create children for the family. I would just say the father, but family expands outside of the nuclear family. So what you saw, especially in Black families, because my family is just one, especially what you saw in Black families was 7 children, 8 children, 9 children, 10 children. Not always by the same pairing, not always by the same mom and dad. Some of those families, from those parents broke up and remarried, and sometimes there were children outside of wedlock. But there were a lot of children being born by each woman. Okay, and it's almost, when you look at pictures of your families from 50 years ago, you could look and see that it was a different world. I mean, could you imagine something like that today? A woman having 5 children, 6 children, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 children. Could you imagine that? Part of the concern, part of what works against that today is finances. The economy. It would be hard for your average family to do that, but also in terms of priorities and in terms of how everyone has been socialized, that's not in the cards for couples today. No woman is thinking about having 10 children. So that was the world back then. That was the environment back then. That was the baby boom. The baby boom. More people, lots of people, more humans everywhere. Okay. So I have a picture of my mom and her siblings and my grandmother. And there were 8 of them. At that time, there were 8. And I noticed one day, right now I don't have children, my brother doesn't. And I noticed, as I look around, many of the Gen Xers and those coming after us, the most you may see, depending upon how wealthy the family is, you may see 3 or 4. But in general, a lot of families are only having 1 or 2 children, if at all. And there are quite a few people who don't, on both sides of the gender line. And I looked at that picture of my mother and her siblings, and I started thinking about an inverted pyramid. So they were the baby boom, and now it almost seems as though things are going in the opposite direction. You had the boom, and now it looks like some sort of contraction. You see that? You have all these babies, and then you're getting a contraction. You're getting a baby bust. Boom, bust. All right. So, Dr. Dunbar, why does that matter? Please smash that like button if you haven't. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. If you want to make a donation to the channel, my Cash App and PayPal are here. So, a population boom versus a population bust. Well, what things could lead to a bust? Well, economics, the deindustrialization of the United States, in this instance, that led to a dearth of low skill jobs. So now you've raised the bar, and the country shifted more towards white collar education and careers. So it became harder for your average man to make a salary that could feed a large family and take care of a large family. That was one thing. Altered social norms, that you know, from the 60s to the 70s and beyond. You went through the women's rights movement. So as I described, so the whole conceptualization of motherhood and being a wife, all of that changed. The family changed for many people, such that we don't see. See, I'm hesitant to say we don't see as many of them as we did before. Well, many nuclear families. You're seeing nuclear families only in certain communities and certain social stratas. So that changed. But also, if you think about Nameless's work on the Mouse Utopia and his discussions with BGS, it seems that there's something biological in there as well, where when a society becomes too technological, when it becomes too advanced and it becomes too comfortable, something happens with male female pairing and reproduction. So there's a biological spin and twist to this as well. So maybe by nature of us becoming so advanced, maybe that just naturally was going to happen. But the other thing I thought about is that people were thinking about this. People were witnessing this baby boom years ago. And there were people who were saying, you know what? What if there are too many humans here? What if we have too many humans on the planet? What if there aren't enough resources for everybody? What if we have so many humans that the earth can't sustain everybody? People were thinking about this, as I'll show you, and world leaders started thinking about this years ago, and they even think about it today. All right. Before I go a little further, does anybody, I have to introduce this term, ecology. Who knows what ecology is? Because this is going to be germane to this piece I'm going to read. Good morning, really, Chris. Thank you for stopping through, as always. Ecology. Who knows what ecology is? And I'm going to show it, but I just want to see if anyone else out there knows. Ecology. That's a biological that's a biological science. Ecology. Anybody? Mr. Blue Collar, do you know what ecology is? All right, I'll give it another minute. If no one bites, I will give the answer. Ecology, ecology, ecology. Ecology was in part what Marvin Gaye's song, Mercy, Mercy Me. If you look at the title, it says Mercy, Mercy Me, parentheses, the ecology. So Marvin Gaye was thinking about the environment and the world and where things were going. Ecology, anybody? Okay. Well, I'll for the sake of time, I'll jump to it. This is Mr. Blue Collar says economic growth of population. No, that's not it. But thank you for taking a swing at it. When you think about ecology, you're thinking about this. You're thinking about how living things, living organisms group together and coexist. You're thinking about ecosystems. You're thinking about the environment, and you're thinking about how the organisms are living together and coexisting. So for any community, there are consumers. We're going back to biology 101. There are consumers, there are producers, and there are uh, food chains. Food chains. So take a look at this cartoon here. So you see, you have the grass on the bottom, right? You have a worm down there. You have an insect, a critter. I don't know if that's a bed bug or a roach or what. But right there on the next level, you have looks like a mallard duck. You have a fish, a mosquito, a snake. And at the top there, you have that penguin, a crocodile, or alligator. I always get them mixed up, and a turtle. So you have different levels. So at the bottom level, that worm and that insect, they're eating up the grass. They're herbivores. Those are plant eaters. And then on the next level, your duck, your fish, your snake, they eat those worms. They eat those insects, right? And then on that top level, you have that pelican. Did I call it a stork or a pelican before? You have that stork at the top. You have that alligator slash crocodile, and you have that turtle. They eat that fish, that duck, that snake. So everything is dependent on the other. You see, in that food chain, in those food chains, everything is dependent on the other. And if you take out one of those organisms from that entire food chain, from that entire web there, the whole thing can collapse. Because if you don't have enough of those worms or those insects at the bottom, then the mallard duck, that catfish, and that snake, they can't eat. So they'll starve and they'll die off. And if they starve and they die off, then that pelican and that crocodile and that turtle, they don't have anything to eat. So they'll starve and they'll die off. And then those plants, they'll just overgrow because the entire chain has been disrupted. So that's ecology. That's what you want to think about when you hear ecology and you hear ecologists talk, and when you think about environments. So that's how in large part how nature is organized. One thing depends upon the other. One organism depends upon the other. And if you take one out, if you remove one, entire populations will collapse. Some will overgrow. Something else will come in, and you look at the entire thing collapsing. So then the question is, what happens if you have too many humans? Because these systems, they typically have a capacity. They have a carrying capacity. They can only take so much. They can only have so many of a certain population. So then the question is, what is too many humans? When do you get to the point where there are too many human beings on the planet? Why does this matter for the environment? Why does this matter for energy? Because all these things are interrelated. And as I described, while we're on YouTube, gender warring and arguing about the Cheesecake Factory and all these different things, and TikToking, and while we're entrenched in our sports teams, and I'm guilty of that sometimes, our world leaders at the United Nations, our president, the World Bank, all of our world leaders, they're looking and they're thinking about this. They're saying, okay, how much oil is left? How much land is left in the United States? How much fresh water is left? How much oil and energy will there be 50 years from now? They're all looking at this. We're not always looking at it, but they're looking at it. And they've been looking at this for a while. And it shapes their thought process, and it shapes some of the policies that come trickling down from them that affect our lives. Well, while we're looking at Democrat, Republican, they're looking at all of these things. So I'm going to get into the piece here about Paul Ehrlich and his book Population Bomb. But to drive this home, to further drive this home, and to drive home that people have been looking at this for a while, let's go over to Disney. I mentioned Disney, the Avengers movies. Anyone? I know you all know this. Who was the big bad guy in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame? Who was the bad guy there? And what was his mission? That's right, Tony. It was Thanos. And a lot of people I love those movies. I love superhero stories. People look at those as children's stories, and some people laugh when they see adults indulging in those worlds and in that art. But a lot of time that art is created based upon reality. So what was Thanos' mission? What was his ultimate goal? We know that he was looking to gather up all 6 Infinity Stones. But what was Thanos really after? I think, Tony, you probably have it there in the chat. There you go. Thanos wanted to reduce the population of the universe. He wanted to get rid of half of all life and restore balance. Because what Thanos saw on his home world of Titan, this was in Infinity War, was that there were so many people that the world ultimately destroyed itself. The people there destroyed themselves. So that became his mission. So when Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, whoever else created Thanos and wrote this, they were writing these stories in the 70s, probably in the 60s and the 70s. I think Marvel goes back to then, but they were around, they were young guys when Paul Ehrlich wrote this book. Okay, so who is Paul Ehrlich? And Dr. Dunbar, why are you telling us about Paul Ehrlich? All right, everyone, it's story time. Now, I was a biology major at Johnson C. Smith University in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is an HBCU. And I'm going to shout out Dr. Joseph Vail Jr. He was a biology professor and he taught us ecology. And that was my first time hearing about Paul Ehrlich and his book, The Population Bomb. All right. So everyone, we're going back 50 years here. So this, as you'll learn, this got people thinking about, are there too many humans? Are there going to be too many humans? And what's going to be the problem? What are the dangers of having too many humans? So think about, as I go through this, think about what's happening now, but also think about the programming that we're seeing from Disney and think about the social agendas that have been pushed, because biology, in human civilizations, biology can be shaped by culture and social messaging and engineering. So think about that. All right. This is not a long piece, but I will stop as I go. Okay, this is entitled The Book That Incited a Worldwide Fear of Overpopulation. Overpopulation. And there have been countries, before I get into that, there have been countries, China was known for a while for instituting its one-child rule. And now they are backtracking on that. They're trying to have more children because China understands if we don't have enough people, then this whole thing is going to collapse. And when you think about the United States, that's part of what this immigration thing is over. I've said that before, because our leaders here understand that we have an inverted pyramid now, where the population is on the brink of going like this. That's going to have long-term ramifications for everybody. And then how do you, once you've socially taught that both genders are the same, and then you've I'm going to get myself in trouble for saying this, but this is a science channel, and this is in part a science talk. When you've taught the one gender that biologically is charged with carrying and incubating the babies, that they can wait until much later in their reproductive cycles, that they can wait until they're 30 and they're 40, well, there are going to be long-term ramifications for that for everybody. Please smash that like button if you haven't. That helps with the channel, and the likes are free. If you want to make a donation, my Cash App and PayPal are there. All right, Paul Ehrlich and the population bomb. The book that incited a worldwide fear of overpopulation, The Population Bomb, made dire predictions and triggered a wave of repression around the world. This was written by Charles C. Mann on January 2018. So this is about 5 years old, but it's relevant nonetheless. As 1968 began, Paul Ehrlich was an entomologist at Stanford University, known to his peers for his groundbreaking studies of the coevolution of flowering plants and butterflies, but almost unknown to the average person. Most of your families won't know who Paul Ehrlich is, particularly in the Black community. Most of your families won't know. They'll say, who? That was about to change. In May, Ehrlich released a quickly written, cheaply bound paperback, The Population Bomb. Initially, it was ignored, but over time, Ehrlich's tract would sell millions of copies and turn its author into a celebrity. It will become one of the most influential books of the 20th century and one of the most heatedly attacked. The first sentence set the tone. The battle to feed all of humanity is over, and humanity had lost. In the 1970s, the book promised hundreds of millions of people are going to starve to death. No matter what people do, nothing can prevent a substantial increase in the world death rate. I see Ray Alexander has entered the building. Let me see what he has to say. Ray Alexander says that the population bomb was also discussed in Immigration, World Poverty, and Gumballs by Roy Beck. Thank you for that, Ray Alexander. Published at the time of tremendous conflict and social upheaval, right? So that was the civil rights era. That was women's rights. That was the make love, not war, the Vietnam War, all that. That was around that time. Published at the time of tremendous conflict and social upheaval, Ehrlich's book argued that many of the day's most alarming events had a single underlying cause: too many people packed into too tight spaces, taking too much from the earth. Unless humanity cut down its numbers soon, all of us would face mass starvation on a dying planet. But today, also think about energy. I would encourage everyone to think about energy. How much oil is there? Will there be enough oil for everyone? I think even though fear about the environment is being pushed, I think our world leaders are looking at the energy too. How will there be enough petroleum for everybody? Will there be enough for every country on the world? And if there are shortages, what will happen? What will be the consequences if there are shortages? They're not telling us everything, but a lot of these things they're looking at. All right. Ehrlich, now 85, which means he's 90 now if he hasn't died, told me recently that the book's main contribution was to make population control acceptable as a topic to debate. But the book did far more than that. It gave a huge jolt to the nascent environmental movement and fueled an anti-population growth crusade that led to human rights abuses around the world. Born in 1932, Ehrlich was raised in a leafy New Jersey town. His childhood love of nature morphed into a fascination for collecting insects, especially butterflies, something of a loner, precocious as he was assertive. Ehrlich was publishing articles in a local entomological journal in his teens. Even then, he was dismayed by environmental degradation. The insecticide DDT was killing his beloved butterflies, and rapid suburban development was destroying their habitat. Let's see. DDT. Do I remember what DDT is? I know it's toluene. I can't think of it. It's di something. Let me look it up really, really quickly. Dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane. That's DDT. Let me read it again. Dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane. All right. So does anyone know what an entomologist is? We'll stop right here for a second. An entomologist. Anyone? All right. An entomologist studies insects. So that's a scientist who studies insects and is a master of insect populations. Aquatechi's here. Aquatechi, you know what? I have a special. You're here. I have something special for you. Give me a second, everyone. I haven't seen you in a while. Let me delete this. Give me a second here, everybody. There we go. Aquatechi's probably been my most generous viewer in terms of donations, and sometimes content creators create things for their subscribers. So Aquatechi, thank you for stopping through.
No sign Decepticons here, Prime.
For those of you who don't recognize Aquatechi's Avi, Aquatechi, I think that's Jazz, right? That's Jazz from the Transformers. It looks like Jazz. It could be something else. All right. Aquatechi, confirm if that's Jazz or not, because otherwise I made up the wrong set of salutes for you. All right. Here's another one for you, Aquatechi.
Roger me, welcome me, anything. Hello, hello, Earth.
So I have some salutes for Aquatechi now. All right. When Ehrlich entered the University of Pennsylvania, he befriended some upperclassmen who were impressed by his refusal to wear the freshman beanie, then a demeaning tradition. Now, wanting to join a fraternity, another university custom, Ehrlich rented a house with friends. They passed around books of interest, including Road to Survival by William Vaughan, published in 1948. It was an early warning of the dangers of overpopulation. We are subject to the same biological laws as any species, Vaughan said. If a species exhausts its resources, it crashes. Homo sapiens, is a species rapidly approaching that terrible fate. Together with his own observations, Vaughan's book shaped Ehrlich's ideas about ecology and population studies. All right, so you all see that? You all see that they started thinking about this back in the 1950s and 60s. Are there too many humans? Were there too many humans? Please smash that like button if you haven't. Do you guys know who did Jazz's voice? Does anybody know that trivia? Who did Jazz's voice in the Transformers? Begins with an S. Who did Jazz's voice? And that's probably, well, you could argue the Transformers. Yeah, that was a science fiction cartoon. The Transformers, you're talking about sentient machines, sentient beings, robotics. That's right, Blue Collar. It was Scatman Crothers. Scatman Crothers from he was in The Shining. He was in Silver Streak. He was in a bunch of different things. The late Scatman Crothers.
Where'd that come from?
All right. Ehrlich got his PhD at the University of Kansas in 1957, writing his dissertation on the morphology, phylogeny, and higher classification of the butterflies. Soon he was hired by Stanford University's biology department, and in his classes, he presented his ideas about population and the environment. Students attracted by his charisma mentioned Ehrlich to their parents. He was invited to speak to alumni groups, which put him in front of larger audiences and then on local radio shows. David Brower, executive director of the Sierra Club, asked him to write a book in a hurry, hoping, naively, Ehrlich says, to influence the 1968 presidential election. Ehrlich and his wife, Anne, who would co-write many of his 40-plus books, produced the first draft of The Population Bomb in about 3 weeks, basing it on his lecture notes. Only his name was on the cover, Ehrlich told me, because the publisher said single-authored books get much more attention than dual-authored books, and I was at the time stupid enough to go along with it. So let's stop right there. Let's go back. Did you guys see that the publisher wanted this book out for the 1968 election so that it could influence the election? That's huge. That's why we're seeing this battle now in terms of climate, and even with the global health crisis of a couple of years ago. When you can use these things to influence politicians, and when you can influence the public, you can sway sentiment, you can sway the way people think and the way they feel. And it could just be a theory of what's going to happen and what's and the dangers of where we're going. It could just be a theory and a speculation. But if you can get people on board, and if you can get them afraid, you can shape policy and you can shape society. So that was huge right there. And that's why you need, for something like this, you need multiple scientists to speak up, and you need multiple scientists to have a voice and to get their messages out. Otherwise, you'll get the train going in a direction that could be the wrong direction altogether. Though Brower thought the book was a first-rate battle tract, no major newspaper reviewed it for 4 months. The New York Times gave it a one-paragraph notice almost a year after its release, yet Ehrlich promoted it relentlessly, promulgating his message at scores or even hundreds of events. In February 1970, Ehrlich's work finally paid off. He was invited onto NBC's Tonight Show. Johnny Carson, the comedian host, was leery of serious guests like university professors because he feared they would be pompous, dull, and opaque. Ehrlich proved to be affable, witty, and blunt. Thousands of letters poured in after his appearance, astonishing the network. The Population Bomb shot up the bestseller lists. Carson invited Ehrlich back in April, just before the first Earth Day. For more than an hour, he spoke about population and ecology, about birth control and sterilization, to an audience of tens of millions. After that, Ehrlich returned to the show many times. So, do you see how the opinions and thoughts of this one scientist, once he was brought onto the stage and these things were introduced, they were allowed to gain traction. And then here we are 30 to 40 years later dealing with these things. Ehrlich said that he and Anne wanted to call the book Population, Resources, and Environment because it's not just population, but their publisher and Brower thought this was too ponderous and asked Hugh Moore, a business activist who had written a pamphlet called The Population Bomb, if they could borrow his title. Ehrlich reluctantly agreed. We hated the title, he says now. It hung me with being the population bomber. Still, he acknowledges the title worked in that it attracted attention. The book received furious denunciations. Many focused on Ehrlich's seeming decision, emphasized by the title, to focus on human numbers as the cause of environmental problems rather than total consumption. The sheer count of people, the critics said, matters much less than what people do. Population per se is not the root of the world's problems. The reason Ehrlich's detractors said is that people are not fungible. The impact of one kind of life is completely different from that of another person living another kind of life. Consider the opening sentence of The Population Bomb. It describes a cab ride that Ehrlich and his family experienced in Delhi in the ancient taxi. Its seats hopping with fleas, the Ehrlichs entered a crowded slum area. And this is from the book. The street seemed alive with people eating, people washing, people sleeping, people visiting, arguing and screaming. People thrust their hands through the taxi window, begging, people defecating and urinating, people clinging to buses, people herding animals, people. Since that night, I've known the feel of overpopulation. That's very, very clever writing there. As a writer myself, that's very, very clever writing. And this is an example of how social movements are started and grown based upon science. So once you start tugging at people's emotions and their fears, whole movements can explode. The Ehrlichs took the cab ride in 1966. How many people lived in Delhi then? A bit more than 2.8 million, according to the United Nations. By comparison, the 1966 population of Paris was about 8 million. No matter how carefully one searches through the archives, it is not easy to find expressions of alarm about how the Champs-Élysées was alive with people. Instead, Paris in 1966 was an emblem of elegance and sophistication. So that's saying that it depends on how you frame things. The way he framed Delhi was it was a very, very dire framing of it, but they're saying Paris had a similar population, but it was never framed that way. Delhi was overcrowded and would continue to grow. By 1975, the city had 4.4 million people, a 50% gain in a decade. Why? Not births, says Sunita Narain, head of the Center for Science and Environment, a think tank in Delhi. Instead, she says the overwhelming majority of people in Delhi then were migrants, drawn from their parts of India by the promise of employment. The government was deliberately trying to shift people away from small farms into industry. Many of the new factories were located around Delhi. Because there were more migrants than jobs, parts of Delhi had become jam-packed and unpleasant, exactly as Ehrlich wrote. But the crowding that gave him the feel for overpopulation had little to do with overall population increase, with the sheer rise in births, and everything to do with institutions and government planning. If you want to understand Delhi's growth, you should study economics and sociology, not ecology and population biology. Okay, do y'all understand what was just said there? That Ehrlich, he framed it a certain way, but that's why you need multiple hypotheses. You need multiple people looking at one thing, because this other person who was from the country said, no, it wasn't just human reproduction and overpopulation. It was government policy that caused all those people to move to the city to create those slums that he saw. So you always need multiple people looking at things to give alternative thoughts and hypotheses. Okay. That's huge. Driving the criticisms of the population bomb were its arresting graphic descriptions of the potential consequences of overpopulation, famine, pollution, social and ecological collapse. Ehrlich says he saw these as scenarios, quote unquote, illustrations of possible outcomes, and he expresses frustration that they are instead continually quoted as predictions, as stark inevitabilities. If he had the ability to go back in time, he said he would not put them in the book. Okay, so he saw the dangers while they were possibilities to him. The media, the political class, they take things and they repackage them and they tell everybody, this is what's going to happen. If we continue down this road, this is what's going to happen. And there's a difference between having a possibility and a prediction and a certainty. So two different things. JJ Amar says, Chaos says, not enough humans or a certain type of human. JJ Amar says, so many theories about population management. Good morning, Corrine. She says, it's so funny that many other people are saying that population will decrease after the next generation because then Gen Y and Gen Z are not having many children. Okay. And then Ray Alexander says, Delhi's 2023 population is now estimated 32,941,309. So it's grown significantly since this book was written. Please smash that like button if you haven't. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. We're doing a little bit of science, current events, a little bit of science history, and some ecology today. This is almost done, by the way, everyone. It is true that in the book, Ehrlich exhorted readers to remember that his scenarios are just possibilities, not predictions. But it is also true that he slipped into the language of prediction occasionally in the book, and more often in other settings. Most of the people who are going to die in the greatest cataclysm in the history of man may have already been born, he promised in a 1969 magazine article. Sometime in the next 15 years, the end will come. So he predicted in the mid-1980s. That did not happen. Ehrlich told CBS News a year later. And by the end, I mean an utter breakdown of the capacity of the planet to support humanity. Okay, that did not happen. That did not happen. Such statements contributed to a wave of population alarm, then sweeping the world. The International Planned Parenthood Federation, the Population Council, the World Bank, the United Nations Population Fund, the Hugh Moore-backed Association for Voluntary Sterilization, and other organizations promoted and funded programs to reduce fertility in poor places. The results were horrific, says Betsy Hartman, author of Reproductive Rights and Wrongs, in a classic 1987 expose of the anti-population crusade. Some population control programs pressured women to use only certain officially mandated contraceptives. In Egypt, Tunisia, Pakistan, South Korea, and Taiwan, health worker salaries were in a system that invited abuse dictated by the number of IUDs they inserted into women. In the Philippines, Birth control pills were literally pitched out of helicopters hovering over remote villages. Millions of people were sterilized, often coercively, sometimes illegally, frequently in unsafe conditions in Mexico, Bolivia, Peru, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. All right, you guys picking this up? So I mentioned at the beginning, when our world leaders meet, they're talking about things that we're not even paying attention to. They're talking about things that are so far off our radars. And if you don't know what they're doing and why, you'll just keep voting for certain people, thinking that they're for you, thinking that they're doing the right thing. And maybe they think they're doing the right thing. But yeah. In the 1970s and 80s, India, led by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and her son Sanjay, embraced policies that in many states required sterilization for men and women to obtain water, electricity, ration cards, medical care, and pay raises. Let me read that again. In the 1970s and 80s, India, led by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and her son Sanjay, embraced policies that in many states required sterilization for men and women to obtain water, electricity, ration cards, medical care, and pay raises. Teachers could expel students from school if their parents weren't sterilized. More than 8 million men and women were sterilized in 1975 alone. At long last, the World Bank head Robert McNamara remarked, India is moving to effectively address its population problem. I had a little sneeze there. For its part, China adopted a one-child policy that led to huge numbers, possibly 100 million of coerced abortions, often in poor conditions, contributing to infection, sterility, and even death. Millions of forced sterilizations occurred. Does China regret that now? Based upon what's going on? I looked at this chart last night. The x-axis, the y-axis on the right represents death toll for great famines. Okay, the x-axis, that represents time spanning from 1900 to 2010. And the y-axis on the left represents the world population. So if you look at 1900, there was a huge death toll from famines. Okay. That number fluctuated up until 1960, and then it trended downwards towards 2010. And then as that number trended downwards, the world population, it seems, increased threefold from about 2 billion to 7 billion. So what's this telling us? So when you decrease famines and there's enough food to feed everybody, there's more people. That's one interpretation. And then the other interpretation is perhaps technology and science evolved to the point where there were no more famines like the ones we saw in the early 1900s. This link is below in the description box, everyone, if you want to keep a copy for yourself. I don't know if YouTube will poach this out. Please smash that like button if you haven't. This is almost finished. Ehrlich does not see himself as responsible for such abuses. He strongly supported population control measures like sterilization and argued that the United States should pressure other governments to launch vasectomy campaigns, but he did not advocate for the program's brutality and discrimination. Equally strongly, he disputes the criticism that none of his scenarios came true. Famines did occur in the 1970s, as Ehrlich had warned. Bangladesh, Cambodia, West and East Africa all were racked horribly by hunger in that decade. Nonetheless, there was no great increase in the death rate around the world, according to a widely accepted count by the British economist Stephen Devereux. Starvation claimed 4 to 5 million lives during that decade, with most of the deaths due to warfare rather than environmental exhaustion from overpopulation. In fact, famine has not been increasing, but has become rarer. When the population bomb appeared, according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture, let me start that again. In fact, famine has not been increasing, but has become rarer. When the population bomb appeared, according to the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, something like 1 out of 4 people in the world was hungry. Today, the proportion of hungry is about 1 out of 10. Meanwhile, the world's population has more than doubled. People are surviving because they have learned how to do things differently. They developed and adopted new agricultural techniques, improved seeds, high-intensity fertilizers, drip irrigation. So the technology improved. The science improved. To Ehrlich, today's reduction in hunger is but a temporary reprieve, a lucky generation-long break, but no indication of a better future. Population will fall, he says, now either when people choose to dramatically reduce birth rates, which we may be seeing right now, or when there is a massive die-off because ecosystems can no longer support us. The much more likely outcome is an increase in the death rate, I'm afraid. Well, right now we're seeing an increase in what we think is the choice to dramatically reduce birth rates. I think that's what we're facing now. His viewpoint, once common, is now more of an outlier. In 20 years of reporting on agriculture, I've met many researchers who share Ehrlich's worry about feeding the world without inflicting massive environmental damage. But I can't recall one who thinks failure is guaranteed or even probable. The battle to feed all of humanity is over, Ehrlich warned. The researchers I've encountered believe the battle continues, and nothing, they say, proves that humanity couldn't win. All right. That was written by Charles C. Mann. This is from the Smithsonian Magazine. And once again, it's called The Book That Indicated a Worldwide Fear of Overpopulation. All right. I've never read Population Bomb. Maybe I'll get a copy and throw it on the stack of things to read. It doesn't look like a long read, but I thought this was a timely subject to cover here because of some of the content that's being created on other channels. I'm thinking about some of the stuff BGS did this week, but also culturally, people like who is it, Susan Venker, are talking about this. Chris Williamson is talking about this. People are talking about this in families and then now at the national level. And just because I think I agree that many of our politicians are afraid to talk about this, because how do you tell the population to start having more children after you've encouraged them not to? How do you do that? But they know it and they see it because they're looking at the numbers, they're looking at the demographics, they're looking at the Census Bureau data. And for those of you watching live and those of you watching on the playback, I would encourage you, think about if people were afraid of this, if people were afraid that there would be too many humans 50 years ago, look at some of the programming that's being created now. The programming, the anti-man programming, the programming creating all the girl bosses. I don't need a man. I don't want a man. I resent being a mother. I resent those motherly duties. When you see that programming, think about where that's coming from and why that programming was created, because someone had to sit down and create programming saying that motherhood in a traditional sense isn't important. It's less important than going out and being in the workforce. Someone had to think about that and write it. And then someone at the producer level had to green light that and say, yeah, make a series on that. Make educational materials on that, or else infuse some of that into the Marvel Avengers movies or into our classic Disney franchises. Let's put that messaging out there. So the messaging has to be created and then it has to be approved to go out for public consumption. So a lot of this is premeditated and a lot of it is planned, in my opinion. And it's not a coincidence, especially when you look at this piece and think about this piece that I just highlighted for you all and for everyone. Okay, I'm going to read a few of your comments. Then I'm going to wrap the stream up because I'm at 1 hour and 11 minutes. I want to thank everyone who came to listen to this and commented and smashed the like button. Maybe YouTube will be nice enough to throw this in the algorithm so other people can see it and be drawn to it. Corrine says, okay, Two Drift says eugenicist. Corrine says, yep, eugenics. Yep, eugenics 101. This is disgusting. Shake my head. Aquateki says policy gone wrong. Ray Alexander says, according to National Public Radio, the current population of Lagos, Nigeria is roughly 24 million. Nigeria has a total population of about 200 million. Nigeria is the size of the state of Texas. That's right, Ray Alexander. And I hear, I've actually presented data here showing that their population by 2050 is projected to explode. So there's something happening there that's different in other parts of the world, but also the social. One concern is that the social movements and ideas and norms that are running rampant here may ultimately go and infect Nigeria. And arguably, that's part of the reason we talked about China, why China has blocked off media from here in the United States, because they don't want our ideas confounding the problem they're already facing. All right. Aquateki says policy gone really wrong. Corrine says they predict that it will be 500 million in the next 30 years. Yep. Chaos says Henry Kissinger, that has been push PO control in the 1970s. I don't know what that means. UFO Kamikaze says Gaia's Revenge. That's a funny picture. UFO Kamikaze looks like a one heck of a holiday party you were at there. Aquateki says, and Chinese favored sons over daughters too. That's true. JJMR says China's population strategy is to annex Africa, therefore creating a mixed race population, according to some NOI members. If you don't know what the NOI is, look it up. Ray Alexander says Texas has a population of 29 million with a state GDP of 2.3 trillion, whereas Nigeria has a population of 200 million with a GDP of $477 billion. Okay, so they don't have as many resources as Texas, though their population is growing. I'm going to read a few more. Yes, China is regretting it now. They are no longer the most populous country, and it was too late to reverse that horrible policy. Yeah, for those watching live, and if you're watching on the playback, look up Stephen Shaw's work. Stephen Shaw has created a documentary on population decline and the number of people who are regretting not having children. I saw him interviewed. I'm going to say another bad word. He was interviewed by Dr. Jordan Peterson. I think Chris Williamson interviewed him as well. And I saw excerpts from his documentary, and it's sad. It is sad. So he's helping to lead the charge on this, though other folks are trying to get out in front as well right now. I'm going to read that again. Karine said, yes, China is regretting it now as they are no longer the most populous country, and it was too late to reverse that horrible policy. And so, yeah, when in terms of mathematics, watching Stephen Shaw's content and his messaging, mathematically, once you reverse it and you start, once you start population decline, it's hard to reverse it to make it go back in the other direction. When you think about math, if you have fewer people, you have to convince those people to start reproducing, and then it will take time. It'll just take time because humans have one baby at a time. They don't have whole litters like canines and felines and insects. So it would take time to turn the ship around, like the Titanic. It's headed towards the iceberg. It would take time to turn it back around in the other direction, if that's even possible. Ray Alexander says, Karine, and when Nigeria hits 5 million in about 30 years, they will have exhausted their soil and natural gas reserves, according to Ibe Kachikwu, Nigeria Prime Minister for Petroleum Resources. So do you see how this is all intermingled? Population, environment, energy. Population, environment, energy. They're all intermingled. So when people are arguing about the environment, they're in part talking about this too. Much of that agenda or programming is pushed even more on certain racial groups in America, if you know what I mean. Yep. And now I think it's catching up to everybody. Mike Rizzi says, whatever China did made them top G for a period. It worked, but with side effects. Ray Alexander says, according to geopolitical scientist Peter Zehan, China's one-child policy completely ruined China's demographics, and it's irreversible. Karine says, yes, people are waking up to this propaganda. That's why Disney is failing, and their branding as of being a family company is no longer exists among many people. Hey, Karine, did you ever see, I was telling my mother the other day, I know everyone here has seen The Lion King. Is it true that there's a scene where Simba jumps in the bush and all the petals go up in the air to make this cloud? A controversy was back in the day that cloud said sex. You had to slow it down to see it, but that was one of the speculations and controversies regarding The Lion King, that when Simba jumped in that bush and those whatever that was went up in the air, the words actually said sex. So they may have been trying to send something subliminally to the children watching the Lion King. Akwateki, thank you for the Cash App.
Don't sign Decepticons in, Prime.
Everyone, that's a little something I made up for Akwateki for his support, and when he comes into the stream. Karine says, yep, I cried when I saw his documentary. Yeah. But a lot of people don't know that that's going on. A lot of people don't know. They don't know the what, and they don't know the why. And the why, for most things, the why is the most important question. And people don't always ask about the why. They just say, oh, we're just here because things evolve. We're just here because you chose to do this or you chose to do that. No, sometimes there are underlying issues and there are underlying factors that led us to the here and now. And sometimes those things are out of your control. Yeah. So the why matters, and sometimes the why is uncomfortable. All right, everyone, it's been 1 hour and 20 minutes. This is in part, my football team is playing later tonight, so that's going to be my nighttime activity. But I wanted to go to the coffee shop today and journal and write and plan and sit and think and veg. So I think I've spoken for long enough, but I hope folks have gotten something out of this. And when you're with your friends and relatives during this holiday season and those conversations come up about, there are fewer little people, there are fewer young people, keep the name. Well, think about the Mouse Utopia. Think about the cultural shifts and how things have been rejiggered in our country. And think about Paul Ehrlich and the population bomb. Are all of these things happening by chance, or were they all premeditated and pre-calculated? And was this all well organized? That's what I want you all to think about going away from this stream. So Paul Ehrlich. And I think there was another gentleman named Thomas Malthus, who was an economist who was kind of in this same thought process. JJ Mars says, good discussion. Thank you, JJ Mars. Yeah, everyone, please share this out. I do have to, over the holiday season, I am going to take a bit of a break. I do have two people that I want to bring on an interview. And then after that, I'm going to take a break. And one thing I have to do is look at the SEO for this channel, because I think there are ways that I can naturally draw more eyes on this channel. This isn't celebrity gossip. This isn't sports. This isn't movies. This is science. Science for the sake of science, science topics, science stories, scientific data, science guests. And these aren't always the most sexy topics. As I was thinking last night, I was thinking, you know what, maybe I'll just throw up a post or a short and tell everybody that there won't be one today. But then I said, you know what? No, keep going, be persistent, keep going. And I thought about something my high school basketball coach, Ken Jones, who's a major character in my book, he asked a player at a workshop one time, why do you play defense? Because you love it. Because you love it. Why do you do science streams? Because I love it. I love it. And I like the fact that you guys keep coming back to hear more of what me and other people have to say. All right, everyone, this is Big Discussions 76, Science and Technology. If you're new, please like, share, and subscribe. If you want to donate something to the channel, let me slow down. If you want to donate something to the channel, my Cash App and PayPal are below in the description box. Please consider joining the Big Words LLC Newsletter. Thank you to those of you who signed up. I think mostly everyone in the chat has signed up. But if you're watching on the playback, I also do a lot of writing in addition to YouTube content creation. I create content, video content, and print content. So if you want to sign up for my newsletter, this link is in the description box. There is a 2-paragraph greeting there, and then you just click that like button there, and it takes you there, and you will be a part of my email list. So please consider signing up. And with that, everyone, I think I'm going to wrap the stream up. And remember the stuff that I present on this channel in general, but particularly what I presented today, most people don't know. They may have been taught about who Paul Ehrlich was, but most of the people in your families, particularly who look like us, they will have no concept of who that was, why he was important, and what that means for society in the world in general. They'll look around and they'll say, you know what, there are fewer young people at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner. There are fewer of our young people having children, but they don't know why. And you know what? They may not even care. People don't care about the why, but keep that in mind. If you feel inclined, share this content out, and hope you got something from it. All right, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I will talk to you again soon, and thank you again for hanging out with me this morning. So, as always, remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Always try to do your best. Take care, and I will talk to you the next time. Bye-bye.